Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Those that are joining us on Facebook and those that are here on Zoom, welcome to our third episode on the Biodiversity web series. My name is Cinderella Ndlovu, and I'm going to be your facilitator for today. So in today's episode, we will be discussing community-led solutions, supporting environmental stewardship in Zimbabwe through indigenous knowledge systems. So with me today, I have our speakers. We have Joanne from BirdLife Zimbabwe. We have Tariro from Excursion Africa. We have Felix Matutu from Forest Commission, and we have Professor Ndmo from the University of Nairobi. So before we begin and hand over the floor to our speakers, we would like to remind everyone of the housekeeping rules. If you are on Zoom, you are reminded to mute your microphone if you are not speaking, so that you minimize interferences for our speakers. During the question and answer session, please raise your hand if you have a question through the raise your hand option, which is available on Zoom. If you are joining us on Facebook Live, please feel free to write your questions in the comment section and we will attend to those. And also, do share the live video with your other friends on Facebook. So to begin our session, we will hand over the floor to Professor Ndmo, who is to share with us his presentation. So for the speakers dive into their presentation, I'll ask them to briefly introduce themselves and their field of expertise. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask me to present to I'm told most youth audience. I want to go through a small presentation very quickly, and then we can start from there. The way I'm looking at it is that we need to harness the power of youth in this aspect of biodiversity. And it comes at a very key moment when there are changes happening globally. But first, I want to show you some things before I can give. Someone said that the power of youth is the commonwealth for the entire world. The faces of young people are the faces of our past, our present and future. No segment in society can match with the power, idealism, enthusiasm, and courage of the young people. I say this with confidence that a lot of young people want to change Africa and the way we look at it. I say this also because a lot has happened in Africa that we need to be part of what would happen. And that is the phases that we have gone through where many of the young people did not participate. And as a result, we find ourselves in very many problems. When the first industrial revolution came, this was around the 1800s, people were beginning to notice that we would have a problem with food supplies if we did not change the way we did our agriculture. And so they brought mechanization, steam engine, and other technologies at the time. Mechanization changed the agriculture. They were able to produce more, which meant productivity went up. Then around 1900, we had the second industrial revolution, which was mass production, assembly lines, and electrical. The first, Africa did not participate. The second, Africa did not participate. The third industrial revolution, which came in the mid-20th century, which was automation, computers, electronics, Africa played a very small role. Now, from 2018, the discourse has centered around the fourth industrial revolution. And what the fourth industrial revolution brings to us are very powerful technologies that will change our lives. it is also being driven by some mega trends. One is globalization and digitalization. Those two mega trends are very key to the success of Africa. Besides those, this fourth industrial revolution is going to be driven by technologies like artificial intelligence, it's going to be big data analytics, Internet of Things, 3D printing, virtual reality. There are so many technologies. We must be in that space because most of the jobs are going to be in that space. And I say this because it is important that we leverage the resources that we have, which is what we are going to discuss about biodiversity. But most people, even as we have a lot of unemployment, nobody has thought about biodiversity. How can we leverage what God has given us to create value, to create wealth? And that is why I said I want to participate in this, because this is where we have missed the point. If we talk about forest biodiversity, the only country that has digitized its forests is Mauritius. From their digitization, they have been able to market about 3 or 4 plants, which are bringing in almost $6 billion in terms of use of those plants to create medicine. Africa and Africans had many, many plants that were used for medication. But that knowledge is disappearing. We are not digitizing it for us today and for those who would come after us. And that is why this subject is so important, that if we are able to digitize, if we are able to create value out of this, we would have changed Africa from what it is thought of to something very different. I want to show you a small example how the resources we have never quite used it, and I'm talking about the Victoria Falls. If you go into YouTube, and it is being used by so many people for many things, and one of the things that it's being used for is people who want to hear some noise. I think somebody disabled me from sharing my screen. If you can allow me to share. Can you allow me to share?
Okay, let me try and sort that out. Maybe Priska can help.
You're still co-host, Professor, so please go ahead and share.
I can go ahead and share.
Yeah.
It will take 1 minute, then I can stop for others. Yeah, what I wanted to show. If you go and check like waterfalls in YouTube, people have captured that sound, and many people use it now. So just 1 second, I share it. Are you able to see? Are you able to hear?
Yes.
Yeah?
You can't hear the sound.
You can't what?
You can't hear the video, but we can see.
Okay. I don't know how I can get the sound to you, but I want you to look at this corner here where I've highlighted. about 7 million people have gone into YouTube to get this sound, to get them to sleep. And there are so many. There are so many that so many sounds. Others go and create certain things. We have all these natural resources, but we have never quite established how we can monetize such an opportunity. And the same thing is for plants, the same thing is for the animals, which we can begin to monetize. And I don't know what are the rules in Zambia, but these are the things we can leverage to monetize. If we had time, we can talk about monetization of our resources for the benefit of the people. It is not just to wait for foreigners to come and see animals, and then we say we are making money from tourism. There is so many revenue models that are emerging, and this is why I wanted to share this, that unless we begin to create value out of them, we cannot take care of those resources. If we know this particular plant is very essential to the vaccine for, say, COVID-19, everybody will take care of it. And this is what I think the message I wanted to pass to you, that it is very key for us to begin monetization so that we can get our youth to pay more attention to our biodiversity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor. I think we'll just let all the speakers go through their presentations, and then we'll have a question and answer session towards the end of our program today. So up next is Mr. Felix Matutu from Forest Commission, and he's going to briefly introduce himself and dive straight to his presentation. Over to you, Mr. Felix.
Thank you very much. I'm fortunate to meet you from. I'm going to present on indigenous knowledge systems and forest management in general in Zimbabwe. So maybe indigenous systems, they play a critical role in forest resources conservation. We recognize the importance of indigenous knowledge systems in forest preservation, forestry management, forest utilization. And if you look at a lot of silvicultural practices that we have adopted even scientifically, they stem from indigenous knowledge systems. So they are very important in forestry management and general conservation. And you also realize that the indigenous knowledge systems are unique for different communities. And this comes because as people interact with their environment, they've got different experiences and they've different uses of the environment. The landscape is different, the climate and the weather are different. That's why you have different indigenous knowledge systems for communities, and they are very important in managing local environments, localized environment. And maybe in Zimbabwe, you see that 40% of our vegetation cover is under communal areas, which means that we need indigenous knowledge systems to manage these forests, not just forests within the community, but even within protected areas and commercial farmers, because we are still the same people come from communal areas who have to manage those forests. So we believe that through IKS and community-based programs such as community-based natural resources management, there's opportunity for participatory forestry management by the community, the communal people who are the custodians of the indigenous knowledge systems. And through the participatory mechanisms, we know that indigenous knowledge systems will also come into play and we will utilize them. So maybe let me just go through a summary of some indigenous knowledge system mechanisms that we witness in the community. The most common one will be sacred forests and sacred places. For example, in Zimbabwe, there is the Ndambakurima Sacred Forest in Domboshala, there is Kombelele in Binga, and in many other areas, people have got their own localized forests or places. And then sacred places, you have maybe mountains, such as Nyanga Mountains, Njele Shrine. These are not really forests which are sacred, but the mountains. But then if you look at the forest ecosystem and biodiversity around those areas, they are well preserved and taken care of because of the sacredness of the shrines, the mountains, and other things that will be there. And then in these forests, you realize that people are prohibited to cut down trees for any purpose, to settle, to plow, or to hunt. And also the forests are preserved specifically for traditional rituals, for spiritual rituals, or cultural rituals, such as rain ceremonies, and sometimes even burial of important people. So it is the belief is that tampering with the sacred places, it invites infliction, sickness, diseases, misfortune, harm, or death. And I'm sure if you come from a communal area, you've heard many stories of how people who disobeyed sacred places were inflicted with sickness, with diseases or misfortune. Sometimes you hear stories of how people cut down trees in a certain area to farm, and then the next day they woke up, the trees were replanted themselves. So that is it with sacred places. So this is Nyanga Mountains to your left of the picture, and then to the right that says Njelele Shrine in Matopos, which are protected areas, which are sacred areas according to the communities. And then sometimes with the permission of the chief and blessings of the spirit mediums, people may be allowed to enter sacred forests for specific purposes, even sustainable harvesting, collecting of fruits, but then there are protocols that are set by communities on how to collect the forest produce. And you realize that all this, it contributes to forest conservation or preservation. And then in our culture, there's also issues of taboo where people are prohibited, restricted, or forbidden to carry out certain practices in the environment of forest in this case. So these differ among communities, and maybe some examples, something that may sound like common sense, like cutting down a fruit tree for any purpose. It is generally taboo to cut down a fruit tree. Cutting wet tree for firewood. Then there are other sacred tree species, like trees at burial sites. You don't just cut down such trees. And then also there's issue of totems. I think we all have totems here, and we respect those animals, and we always endeavor to protect the ecosystems or the habitats for these animals. So all this contributes to preservation of the forests. And there are also other trees that cannot be used for firewood, and these differ according to different communities. I'll give you an example of one common tree species in Zimbabwe, Parinalia curaterifolia, which is Mohacha in Shona. So traditional healers, traditional leaders, and faith healers, they have high belief in this tree, and cutting it down is generally taboo or prohibited. It's used for many things, for many ailments, STDs, snakes, respiratory. It boosts the immune system. It can also be used as a lucky charm if you want to win love, or if you want to win back someone who you loved and you've lost them. They use it. Faith healers, they use it when they are praying. You pray under the tree, they say God will hear you. And also those who make crosses, they use the wood from this tree because of their belief. And then traditional healers, some of them, they also believe that this tree, if you use the concoction from this tree, it is good to chase away evil spirits. So you find many homesteads with this tree because they believe it chases away evil spirits when it produces that hissing sound, which it usually produces. And generally, it is associated with good cultural values in our African religion, and also it's edible. So all these things, when you combine them, it makes this tree a taboo. It's a taboo to destroy it, not to conserve it. So in a way, all these things, this is indigenous knowledge system that aids in preservation and conservation of this tree. And then there are other customary practices that are there, which we might think are not indigenous, but they are, like rotational grazing. If you grow up in communal areas, you know that there will be designated points to say, from this time to this time, our cattle graze this side. From this time to this time, our livestock move on to that side. It's part of indigenous knowledge system to preserve the environment. And then in some cultures, particularly in Matabeleland, there's a process of forest cleaning, where every year, just before the rains, people in the community go in the forest, they pick up bones, they pick up foreign objects, plates, and other things that will be in the forest that that will be in the forest, which make the forest not to be what's supposed to be. And when they remove these things, they burn them, and they believe that it will make the rains come better. But all in all, it also contributes to management of the forest health itself. And then cutting of wood tree for firewood is a punishable offense by local leadership in some areas. And then traditional leaders also control the settlement pattern. If you want to settle in an area, you consult traditional leader, and the right to say you cannot settle here because this is our forest for grazing and all that. So these are knowledge systems that were already there even before science was there. And then they also, traditional leaders in particular, control harvesting of fruits and other seasonal forest produce. In some communities, it is legal to harvest forest produce before the traditional leader gives a go-ahead. And in some instances, some communities, the first fruits are taken and offered to the ancestors before they can give the community to harvest and do any other business. And there are many other community bylaws that we know that are there that aid in forest conservation. And then I'll also briefly look at the forest policy that we have in our country and indigenous knowledge systems. We generally have the Communal Lands Forest Produce Act and the Traditional Leaders Act, but there are also other acts such as the Forest Act, the Rural District Councils Act, the Communal Lands Act, which are all read to preserve the environment. So generally, the Act says that traditional leaders are custodians of natural resources in communal areas, and the law empowers all traditional leaders. It empowers people within an area to exploit natural resources for domestic purposes only. And then the traditional leaders are supposed to manage the exploitation of these resources. So the traditional leaders are custodians of forest resources according to the law. And it is illegal to trade or move forest produce without a permit. But now the law also gives traditional leaders, together with support of community structures like committees, we call them resource committees, some call them environmental committees, some call them grazing committees, whatever the name of the committee. But the traditional leaders have a right to sit down and formulate their bylaws for preservation of their forest resources. And you see that through this process of bylaw formulation process, they can also include some of their indigenous knowledge systems in managing their forest resources, and also even use their traditional courts to punish offenders, they got that right. And then let me briefly go to challenges in indigenous knowledge systems in forest management. You see that indigenous knowledge systems are now more pronounced among the elderly than the young generation. The youth don't understand or appreciate indigenous knowledge systems. And then for some people, indigenous knowledge systems are regarded as demonic, ancient, retrogressive, and civilized, especially among those who say they are modernized. And then some people, they will demand proof or reliability of indigenous knowledge system. You say forest is, for example, sacred. They want to go and see that which you are saying is sacred. They want to see it for themselves. And they go against the norms, the customs, the taboos, which underpin indigenous knowledge systems in forest resource management. And then some individuals challenge the suitability of illiterate spirit mediums, traditional leaders in presiding over forest resources management, particularly where I talked about bylaws and traditional courts. And then the issue of corruption, even if they know that they have to preserve the environment, or even if they are custodians, where people are custodians of indigenous knowledge systems, they're still involved in activities that are not good for the environment for reasons beyond which we cannot discuss here. And then we'll also see that because of migration and globalization, there's now a generation gap between to our traditional practices, like I said before. And then other challenges that some practices are no longer consistent with the current trends of climate change, climate variability, increased human population, and the forest policies that we have currently. I'll give an example of shifting cultivation, where indigenous knowledge system in some communities have taught them to practice shifting cultivation, to slash and burn, farm for 2-3 years, move to another area. It's no longer sustainable now. And these are some of the practices that some of the indigenous knowledge systems that we have that we need to change. Block burning, where every year people used to burn grass, to burn moribund grass so that new grass grows. We cannot afford to do that now because of climate change and the policies that we have. Overstocking, where you were believed to be a person if you had lots of livestock, is no longer sustainable now because our population has increased and the climate is not the climate has gone down. It's not able to support the carrying capacity of the rangeland, and the forests have decreased. So we need to change some of the systems that we have. And then there are other tree planting practices that you see, like some will put stones in the planting holes, put bones and all those things. Those things are you cannot explain, but they are not good when you are practicing tree care and tree growing. And then in conclusion, I would say that traditional knowledge is essential for the promotion of bottom-up forest resources utilization and management. And then to promote a participatory approach to forest resources management, our conservation approaches should also integrate indigenous knowledge systems and also science, and also taking into consideration the forest policy so that we use our resources sustainably. And then indigenous knowledge system custodians, mainly the elderly, they should be willing to share their knowledge on forest resource conservation. So some custodians are not willing to release all the information. They only release it in bits and pieces. For example, they'll tell you not to cut down a tree because they know they are using it maybe for some medicine, which they don't want to tell you, and sometimes they will not release all the information. But I believe if all information is released, it will help everyone to appreciate and understand why they have to preserve a certain resource. And this can be done through consultative meetings where people can sit down from different backgrounds, generation divides, and discuss these issues to sustainably manage the forest resources. And lastly, I think we need more documentation, awareness, and sharing of information on indigenous knowledge systems. And we need more people going into field of ethnobotany to understand more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Felix, for your presentation. Up next, we'll be having Joanne from BirdLife Zimbabwe to give us a presentation. Over to you, Joanne.
Okay, thank you so much, Cindy. Hello to everyone joining us from Zoom and from Facebook Live. My name is Joan Banda and I'm with BirdLife Zimbabwe. So today I would like to take us through the role of the role that culture plays, the role that birds play in culture, relating it to conservation practices, especially when we're looking at the Ndebele culture. I'm trying to share my screen here, but it says I'm not enabled.
Oh,
Cindy, could you please check that for me?
okay.
All right, we're good now. Yeah. Okay, so like I said, we'll be talking about the role of culture in conservation, specifically looking at the role that birds play in East Ndebele culture. So just very briefly, the Ndebele are an ethnic group of people that stay in the western part of Zimbabwe called Matabele land. And they're also a tribe which is part of the Nguni nation and its respective dialects. So like all other ethnic groups, they also have a set of rules that they uphold, and this serves in the identification of them as a culture. So throughout this presentation, we will look at the role of names, the role of taboos and folklore, birds as pests and as food, as well as birds as medicine in the Ndebele culture. So first off, to start with names, like almost every other language, names portray a message. I'm sure we've got, most of us have got second names, which are mainly in our maiden languages, which also serve to convey certain messages across. But in the case of birds, in East Ndebele culture, they derive their names from plumage color, songs, or behavioral and breeding activities. So while we've got these names, we also have some that are named generically, meaning to say that a whole group of birds will be grouped and then given just one name. What you see on the picture there is a paradise wider known as Umsilabundu in Isindebele, and that literally translates to the one with a bump on its tail. And I'm sure the bump is pretty visible there. So just to explain a bit further on the generic names, we've got eagles. Almost all eagles are known as Ukhozi in Isindebele. Vultures are known as Amanqe. The doves are called Amajuba, the weavers are called Intuga, and the ducks are called Amadada. This is just a few for just that I chose from the presentation. And also you can see from the pictures on the slide why these names would tend to be generic. We've got the black-chested snake eagle, the brown eagle, and the tawny eagle. Now, according to our scientific studies, we've noticed the difference between these and given them their respective names. But in Isindebele, surely you can see that they all appear brown, and there wouldn't be any need to specify really on their names because they all look similar. So on to taboos and folklore. The most important group would probably be that of the rainbirds. So the first one that we have is the Jacobin's cuckoo, the white stork known as Ingabuzane, the swallows and martins known as Inkonjani. This name represents both groups of birds, as well as the southern ground hornbill, which is the Insingizi. So you'll see the numbers that are next to the text, they correspond to the numbers in the pictures, just for a visual appreciation there. So what's special about these birds when we're now talking conservation is that, as we know, the Ndebele like farming and also cattle ranching. So they appreciate rain in all of its forms. And definitely whatever signals are coming of rain, such as these birds, is highly revered and protected. We also have the Greater Honey Guide. Now, the story of the Honey Guide is one interesting one because they say that it's got a call that will literally guide you to the honey, like the name says, to a honey, to a beehive where you'll get some honey there. But it is also customary for you to leave some honey for the bird, because if you don't, on your way back, you're likely to meet a very venomous snake or a corpse in some instances. So it's very mandatory for you to leave some honey for the bird once it's taking you to the honey. Now, to come to the bird omens that some birds are said to represent. Firstly, we've got the hammerkop, which is called utegwani. Now, this one is especially protected, and also considering its nest or eggs, you're not supposed to touch these, otherwise you'll literally lose your brains. And the yellow-billed hornbill, known as ukoro, is protected during its breeding season. Now, the story with this one says that during the breeding season, you're not supposed to kill the yellow-billed hornbill that you see, because that will be the male bird, and it would have left the female bird incubating the eggs back in the nest. So then if you kill the male bird, the female bird will also die of starvation, and there won't be any reproductive success. So that's why they're trying to achieve with this concept of protecting the male yellow-billed hornbill. We also have the fork-tailed drongo, which is called umandingwani. I'm sure a lot of soccer fans from Zimbabwe who love local league football would know this from one of our local teams. Now, this bird is said to signal bad news if heard calling near the homestead at dawn. And then also you realize that in the previous slide we had the southern ground hornbill as a rain bird, but in this slide it now represents imminent death of an elderly person. But the case now, the scenario is now different, because in the previous slide, if it was heard calling, then that's a good sign because it represents a homestead. That would mean would signal imminent death of an older person of the family. So we can see there's double classifications. They can also be a problem for bird conservation. Also continuing on taboos and folklore, we've got what is known as the lightning bird, the story of the lightning bird. Now, this bird is unidentified specifically down to the species, but most stories and folklore say that it's a big raptor, something like the image seen there. Now, some say that it's black and red, others say that it's white and red. The story is not really clear on that. So the story with the lightning bird is that it lays its eggs on the ground during thunderstorms, so it only comes down when the lightning strikes. As a consequence of that, all ground nesting birds are believed to be the relatives of the lightning bird, and so their nests are treated with a great deal of respect. Now coming to birds as food, then Ndebele are quite a particular group when it comes to their food. I think that also spreads across to different cultures. But one thing to note though, when it comes to the Ndebeles, is that birds are not really an important source of food in their diet. They're only used as snakes or when they really just eat them for interest. But when it comes down to it, colonial nesting birds and common birds are preferred. So this also goes to serve on the bird biology, because we see that colonial nesting birds, we tend to get a lot of them nesting in one area, and then so the chances of them, over harvesting them are a bit extreme. And also common birds are also preferred, such as quillias, sparrows, and weavers. Now these face no imminent threat from hunting just for fun. It is key to note, though, that there are certain restrictions and prohibitions when it comes to some species, such as the Namakwa dove. So we also tend to notice that the distribution of the Namakwa dove is not really as widespread as for other doves, such as the laughing dove, for example. So this is why perhaps it was protected, and it said that it's not to be eaten by children. It is believed to cause epilepsy. Now, this is also a big part of the bird's biology, because the Namakwa dove tends to feign death in a lot of instances. So they just took this instance and related it to causing to the seizures that happened when one has got epilepsy. So we see that the Ndebele tend to characterize human behavior as well as linking it to that of birds, and then at the end achieving some form of conservation action through that. So it is key to note, though, that men do not usually eat birds except for large species, and then it's also their responsibility to train young boys in hunting techniques and ethics. So this is whereby they train their boys on sustainable harvesting techniques, harvesting techniques that are the least cruel to the animals, and things like that. Now, when it comes to pests,
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, Cindy, you were saying something?
No, please go on.
All right. Now looking at birds as pests in the Ndebele culture, fortunately, most of the crop pests fall into the edible groups, and so control measures usually involve catching them for food, which is literally two birds with one stone. And then, so for killing these birds, they're usually smoked, and then when they're dazed, now that's when they can be caught for food. So livestock pests include the Lana falcon, known as Uhelwane, the yellow-billed kite, known as Umzwazwa, the juvenile martial eagle, known as Ukhozi or Lomdlophe, which translates to the white eagle. Now, lightning bird, it also serves to protect all eagles, because the lightning bird is suspected to be the particular eagle by some, and thus by these eagles being related to them, they also enjoy that cloud of protection. Now, just before I proceed to the slide where I talk about birds as medicine, what's considered worse in Ndebele culture than seeing a bird omen or having birds eat your livestock or your crops is actually killing them, because this will result in persecution by the community, as well as some traditional leaders also have strict regulations when it comes to killing these birds. So it's usually just encouraged for you to chase them away. And a component of birds in the Ndebele culture is medicine. So these are used in both curative and preventative medicine, whereby in curative medicine would have to ingest the the preparations one way or another, whether through smoke or through prepared concoctions that you have to drink, or lotions that you have to spread. And then in preventative medicine, so this is when it's lucky charm, love potions, things that are with you, or things that you plant in. Okay, I think I lost you guys a bit there. Let me just continue. All right. So most raptors, especially eagles and vultures, the body parts that are used in the traditional medicine industry are the skull, the brain, the feathers, the feet, and the heart. The butler and the vulture feathers and brains are made into cigarettes and smoked by the doctors for dreaming powers, and also to enhance his healing abilities. Now, just to discuss these 2 points, you notice that they lead to persecution of these birds. But normally in traditional culture, it's the norm for only selected healers that are allowed to go and hunt for such birds on the guidance of the spirits. So this meant that the birds were killed very rarely, also by relatively knowledgeable people, and we suspect that this bird biology and only killed the males whenever necessary. Yeah. But when it comes to doves, which are relatively plenty bird species, we see that they even use their heart, and this particular one doesn't have a restriction as to whom can harvest it, but most people just rely on their traditional doctors to do the job. So in conclusion, birds really play a sacred role in the Ndebele culture, being the subjects of practices that are both positive and negative, and this has a great implication for their welfare. Now, the challenge comes to us, therefore, to encourage the positive beliefs and possibly incorporate them into current conservation strategies. Like the prof mentioned, that we have to, get into the conservation space as youths, but we also have to take our indigenous knowledge with us. So, like also what the prof said, there's also need for a change of attitude among the young and educated, so that we can respect and recognize those who still uphold these traditions, just to avoid the conflicts between science and culture. And then I would like to thank those guys over there for their contribution towards this presentation. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanne, for the informative presentation. We will now have our last speaker, Tariro Mtanga from Excursion Africa, to share with us his presentation. And then lastly, we'll have a question and answer session. So for the audience that are watching on Facebook, feel free to start typing your questions. And those on Zoom will be using the raise your hand option, as I mentioned at the beginning of the program. Over to you, Tariro.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Okay, in the interest of time, I shall just go in and try to kill as many birds with this one stone that I have. Okay, so I'm a field guide by profession, and working towards being a professional hunter. So we work so many times, and so often we come across people with various beliefs and theories that they bring on board. You may be told that before you shoot an animal, you need to actually get permission, as Felix had mentioned earlier, you get permission from the nearby chiefs, from the local authorities and all that. So this on its own is a way of ensuring that things are done in the right way and not to offend the spirits, because our indigenous knowledge systems rely mostly on the fear of the unknown. You are told things that you may not know why they are supposed to happen that way or in that particular manner, but you follow them either way because you are likely to be met punishment of spiritual nature or even a physical nature in some instances. Some of these punishments come in the form of death and bad luck, misfortune. So to avoid most of these things, people tend to fall in line. So that is why we have our indigenous knowledge systems sticking to a bit of a mystic culture, is to ensure that things are done in the right way, and to ensure that once things are done in the right way, they shall continuously done in that particular manner. Okay, so as I said, I'm into tourism, and the advantage of being in such a field lies in the fact that there's a blend of cultures. I am able to come across people from different nationalities at one time. This allows me to take the role of a custodian and to share our knowledge systems. This is how I am able to explain why Africans behave in a certain manner, why people behave in a particular instance, and why we believe such things to be taboo. And then we also want to acknowledge the importance of our various designated land pieces. We've got, as some of the people have mentioned earlier on, we've got sacred lands and sacred mountains, sacred forests, and all that. So before you access these places, you are actually told to consult the local chiefs first. At times, you realize that people may not be granted permission to walk into those places for certain reasons, and it's due to the chief's discretion. This is mostly because they can basically give an assessment of your behavior and tell if you will be able to respect the laws and the bylaws of that particular area, and if you have paid attention to the briefing they have given you. So that on its own is a way of ensuring that the land is respected and its resources will stay respected. Okay, and then the curatorship of our places, of our designated places and our resources lies within our hands, to be honest, because at the end of the day, we are the people with the land at our disposal. We are the people with the forest at our disposal. And if we let other people take care of it for us, then we're missing a certain point. In this particular instance, I would like to point out that the law of Zimbabwe, the government of Zimbabwe has actually gazetted a few acts and policies concerning the environment, parks and wildlife, and as well as Forestry Commission Act. And these acts have got certain aspects such as specially protected animals and specially protected plants. These are plants that have been deemed to be in need of protection because of maybe extinction and a high value in some instances. Maybe they are being poached and being sold, and maybe they're being abused in a certain manner. So there is need for us to protect those. But then you can't protect something you don't know, something you don't understand. So the beginning of the conservation of our own environment starts by us gaining the right knowledge and us acknowledging that we have indigenous knowledge at our disposal, and we also have the advantage of technology on our side. So that being said, I just want to mention that as Joanne had stated earlier, we need to have a change of attitude towards our information, the sources of our information, our land and our resources. We need to start paying more attention to the detail. Okay. And then I'll briefly go back and look at totems, even though someone did mention that. It's a topic of interest to me because it sets us apart from other people. Everyone's got a totem, almost everyone's got a totem here in Zimbabwe, and there is a certain meaning to it. For us, as I'm a Duba person, my totem is that of a zebra, so it leaves me in a position to revere a zebra. And by our customary laws, I am not allowed to eat zebra meat. So that leaves a huge chunk of the population would then become my relatives who are also not allowed to eat zebra meat. That on its own means that a certain section of the population has been barred from eating zebra meat. And then those of the Nyati, the buffalo clan, are also not allowed to eat the buffalo. The elephant people are not allowed to have elephant meat. So that leaves a certain part of the population in a position to not touch a certain animal and to actually protect it and revere it. So that is a very interesting way of ensuring that the populations of these animals are not depleted in one go. And then I'll just slide back into a few animals that I've seen that have value in our environment. You look at animals like elephants, and when you see elephants, they are at a very high risk of being poached every now and then. And they are also a keystone species in the environment. So what normally happens with such species is that it is always good to let them have their way in an environment, because they are the engineers of that particular environment. They determine how the environment turn out to be at the end of the day. So having a large number of the population, if you notice, most of the people, especially the Ndebele people, there's a very high number of people, those being the elephant people, and Dube people, Nube people, among others. So such animals that need protection also turn out to have a large number of the population with it as the totem. Okay, and then I also look at the rhinoceros, Upechani. These animals have been poached repeatedly because of their horn, and honestly, this is one of the negative effects of indigenous knowledge systems. I say this because a certain group of people have acknowledged that the rhino horn has qualities that allow certain human beings to develop certain skills upon ingesting a rhino horn. This information turns out to be incorrect, but then it's information that has been circulated in a long time and over again, such that it is now up to us to start correcting the misconception of the rhino horn, and this will ultimately lead to us saving the populations of the rhinos on the planet. And then on the same note, when it comes to animals like rhinos, despite the fact that we as a people protect them, and the government also has various anti-poaching and protection mechanisms set up for the protection of these animals, we also need to start addressing this at a very, very personal level. We need to personally become the custodians of these animals. We need to be their individual spokespersons. So as a guide, I'll take any opportunity that I have to talk to anyone and everyone who is willing to listen, especially whenever I'm on tour, because I have as much time as possible with these people, and we'll talk about everything. And I'll take the opportunity to really plant the ideas in their heads, plant the uproot the negative thoughts, uproot the negative connotations associated with our environment and our resources. You know, because at the end of the day, like we have stated earlier on, it is going to be up to us to take care of our environment and our resources. And then, given that curatorship is going to be an issue, curatorship of the land and our indigenous knowledge systems, as well as our intangible natural resources, I think it's a matter of time before we lose everything, because the way things are going, we know why some things are not supposed to be done, but then there are some things we do and don't understand why we do them that particular manner. I personally get the feeling that the why part has been lost. Maybe it's been lost in translation, or it's been lost over a period of time, in the sense that it eventually got forgotten. So this gives us a challenge again as the youth again. We are supposed to start taking note of this before the older generations. We have them at our disposal. Let's start gathering the knowledge they have and documenting it. We have technology, with social media, with laptops, with computers and everything. Let us start gathering everything and start telling our story for what it is. Because if we don't tell our own story, no one will. So for us as tourism professionals, we will take a moment to sit and talk to you. And we also hope that everyone else will also take this up as a personal responsibility and task to save up on the indigenous knowledge systems that we have. Talk to your elders, talk to your parents, your grandparents. Try as much as possible to document as much as you can, and save it for the next generation, because most of this information has been passed down to us orally. Not much has been captured. But then we still have a redeeming moment at hand. So I think the best we can do for ourselves and for our future generations is to start saving up on this information and making sure that it is going to be available easily. So I'm guessing I've been heard, and I'm hoping that after this session, we'll have a whole new set of custodians of our environment. Okay. And then I have a few notions that I heard earlier today as I was discussing this topic with a few friends, and I just thought they're worth sharing. You know, there is an element of controlled harvesting of fruits, as Felix had mentioned earlier, and one of the most popular notions in that field was that of, I'll say it in Shona first, ukapinda mudondo usatora michero yakawanda, tora yaunokwanisa kudya wosiya imwe yachona. This basically translates to, whenever you get into a forest, eat what you need and leave the rest. This then it cultivates the culture of cutting out greed. It's an issue of handling what you need and leaving some for the future generations. Because if you look at it from an environmentalist perspective, seeds from a plant are transported by animals and humans. We've got plants like the Lantana camara, and these ones tend to be invasive. So once you eat those tiny berries and you move out of that particular area with those berries and you drop the seeds elsewhere, you are likely going to create a fresh batch of a troublesome plant. That's one way of looking at it. The other way would be to just consider the fact that these plants are in a very good environment to grow, explaining why you found a big tree there initially. So just let them be. They'll grow and they'll perpetuate, and the forest will stay there forever. It will probably be sustained as long as no one comes down to destroy it. So that's just one of the notions that I thought I would point out clearly, because it sets a precedence for understanding the various implications of not following certain rules set by our community leaders and elders. And then I think this basically covers everything that I had without trying to repeat what my colleagues have covered. If you have any questions, do feel free to let me know, and I will be at your disposal to answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tariro. We'd like to thank all of our speakers today for sharing such valuable knowledge that we can't find in textbooks, knowledge you can't find even on the internet. Thank you so much for sharing the knowledge. We have Chieta. She's raising her hand here on Zoom. Chieta, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, everyone. Chieta Hari currently with the Judiciary Service Commission of Zimbabwe, but I'm an independent researcher with a keen interest in environmental and biodiversity management. So, can you hear me?
Yes,
Am I
we can
audible?
hear you, Chieta.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you very much to our panelists for an insightful presentation. My main worry is on the undermining of indigenous knowledge systems with regards to the young generation. I recently conducted a research on the relevance of indigenous knowledge systems in local governance here in Bulawayo. And when I was gathering my data, I realized that the young generation has totally no knowledge at all with regards to indigenous knowledge systems. You ask a sample of about 10, 15 young people, they'll tell you that they know nothing about indigenous knowledge systems. So my question is directed to Mr. Matutu, the Forest Commission officer, that in your presentation, you gave us a insightful presentation on how indigenous knowledge systems are relevant, but they were more relevant in rural areas. What efforts are you doing as the foreign forest commission officers to uphold indigenous knowledge systems in urban areas? Because when we're talking of biodiversity loss, we are not only concentrating on the rural area, it is also affected here in urban areas, considering the rate at which our towns are expanding. So it's a main worry. What are we doing to affirm or to bring knowledge or awareness campaigns to the young generation with regards to indigenous knowledge systems in urban setups? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chieta, for your question. Maybe we hand over the floor to Mr. Matutu if he's ready to take on the question since it's directed to him.
Okay, thank you for the question. Maybe in terms of what we are doing, or maybe let me say first, we are biased towards the rural areas because that's where the forests are. In the urban areas, it's mainly a concrete jungle. So even if we talk a lot about the indigenous knowledge systems, the forest management is not really there in the urban areas to speak of. But we do have activities in the urban areas where we deliberately talk about forest conservation, tree care, tree growing, for example, where we conduct tree planting campaigns at schools, and then also there are other competitions that we've had before where we deliberately promote forest conservation and tree care. But mainly when we talk to the urbanites, we're talking in terms of preserving the forests and also preserving the forests for by using alternative sources of energy, because that's where mainly we have a challenge for when you look at urban areas and forests. So maybe my answer in brief is that mainly it's rural areas because that's where the resource is. But then beyond just forestry commission, you see that even the curriculum that we have now, the education curriculum, they're kind of trying to mainstream environmental stewardship in the learning system from ECD up to tertiary. But I think it still needs to be scaled up though, but it is there. Thank you.
I was going to ask permission that I leave.
Hello, Professor. There's a question for you before you leave. Maybe you can just take this one.
Thank you.
The question is from Facebook, from Tatenda Benjamin Manucci. As he says, as hinted by the gentleman from Excursion Africa, our contemporary African and Zimbabwean societies in particular have multiple systems of knowledge coexisting, and the use of informatics is becoming increasingly widespread. When are we going to start digitizing our indigenous knowledge?
That's why I said we must begin to digitize, because as we urbanize, we lose a lot of knowledge, that the indigenous knowledge. We must have it in digital formats, and then we must create incentives that the people begin to pay attention to biodiversity. Like the forests, there must be an incentive, and there are many ways of monetizing so that there is interest. It doesn't mean that we are going to cut trees, but monetization could be out of digitization, because we can now widely be able to talk about the indigenous knowledge and how it was used for purposes of healing, for purposes of other things. So if we don't say it, and a few people have that knowledge, when they die, we will lose it. We would even not be able to benefit from that knowledge in the days to come. So this fourth industrial revolution gives us an opportunity to digitize, and share that knowledge widely, not just in Zimbabwe or Zambia, that across Africa and across the world. That is the benefit for digitalization, that everything will be digitalized. If we can't do it, we would miss the opportunity like we missed the first, second, and almost the third industrial revolution.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor. We hope Tatenda has been answered.
Thank you. So I have to go somewhere. That's why I requested that I leave.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Really appreciate the presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, now we shall take a question from Lucius Mujuru. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question.
Thank you so much. My name is Lucius Mujuru, as you have said, and I would like to thank you for all the presentations that have been presented this afternoon. I've got just a few questions. The first question is directed to Mr. Matutu from Forestry Commission. I just want to know the efforts that have been put by Forestry Commission in integrating the indigenous knowledge system and the science, or maybe the technical know-how that they have at Forestry Commission. What fusion have been put in place to integrate the two? Then the other question that I would want to ask is that I think this one is a general question. I just want to know maybe efforts that have been put forward in the documentation of the indigenous knowledge systems that we have in our communities, especially in the rural communities, because we understand that most of the elders are passing on because of the time, and we are losing some of this knowledge, and they are just going that knowledge, but we don't have documentation of such knowledge. So this is just an open question maybe to all the presenters that we have on this panel, or as to what efforts have been put in the documentation of that indigenous knowledge. Then the other question that I have, I hope my questions are not too many, but the other question that I have is directed to Fadzai Banda. I just want to know how maybe BirdLife and other institutions are trying to correct the anomaly that was mentioned in the presentation. There was an area where there was mentioning of the generalization of generic names of birds. For example, Iskova. It's just to mean a pool of birds. Same as applied to different names that we were given. Amangri, I think it refers to all the eagles and so forth. So what efforts are we having also so as to correct that anomaly to the youth who are now growing up, so that as they are growing up, they can easily discriminate that amongst these eagles in our local languages, be it Isindebele, be it in Shona, we have this kind of eagle, so that we differentiate and we can easily monitor maybe as they are affected by different factors. I think that's the second from last question. Then the last question is also general. Tariro and Mr. Matutu, they talked about bylaws. These bylaws, yeah, I've seen in Zimbabwe. If you go to Mberengwa, under Chief Ngumbane, there are some bylaws that are there which are in operation. But how binding are they? Are they effective? Are they capacitated? Maybe I would want to hear just a discussion maybe from any of the two presenters. I think those were the issues that I wanted to raise from the presentations that have been made. But otherwise, I want to thank all the presenters. The presentations were very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucius, for the questions. Joanne? Hello, Joanne? Joanne, are you still there? Okay, maybe we can move on to Mr. Matutu or Tariro to tackle the questions that were raised.
Okay, so I think I'll handle two of the questions because I really do not have the capacity to respond on the BirdLife question. So for now, I will talk about the documentation of indigenous knowledge systems. Okay, what we need to do, or rather what I am doing on my end as Excursion Africa is I'm linking up with various institutions and other organizations such as Green Art Initiative, WABIB, Ekasi Magazine, and Ukos Analytics to just keep gathering this information and documenting it. I am trying to have it in a position whereby we get to a point whereby children and future generations can go online and find this information. We want a scenario whereby this information becomes a part of our syllabus. We want a scenario whereby the Ministry of Education, Sports and Culture has a section specifically for all this information we need. So it's a movement we're trying to do. It's not going to be easy, but then it's something that's in the pipeline. Because we are looking at the various ways of gathering this information. We need the analytics to be done. We need an area to actually publicize this information that we have. We need the groundwork done. We need researchers to go on the ground. I'm actually happy to know that Chia Zahari was here. She's one of the researchers that I know personally who's been keen on this particular topic. So it shows that as it is right now, things are being done. There's work on the ground that is being done, but then it's just an issue of time for it to start showing. We need to start reaping the fruit, and I assure you it's only a matter of time before we get to tangible fruit. And then in the light of bylaws and laws in certain areas, really, the question was how binding are they? I would like to believe that they are really binding in the sense that once you are caught by a chief in his area breaking laws, or once someone reports you, you're going to be fined eventually. You are eligible to get fined, and what normally happens is either you pay money or you pay in the form of a beast, or you're banned from that area. That just goes on to show how serious these people would be in such instances. I remember at some point in my childhood, we went to an area in Masvingo and we were told not to go past a certain point. And one of the guys leading the trip went beyond that point and he was charged a beast. He ended up paying a full cow for breaching such a law. So I'm sure this can show you that these laws are binding. As much as there is not much enforcement done, but then they really are binding. There is results and there's consequences attached to these laws. I hope Lucius is answered, and if I missed a point, feel free to bring it up again.
Okay, thank you so much, Tariro. We hope, Lucius, you have been adequately answered. I think we'll go back to Mr. Matutu with regards to Lucius' question. I'm going to cross over to Facebook. There's a question from Ndlovuma Kosonke. He or she is asking, are indigenous knowledge systems still reliable considering the changing climate? If there's any of our guests that would want to tackle the question.
Okay, can I maybe answer part of Lucia's question on integrating indigenous knowledge systems and the science that we have now? I think through the projects that we do, community-based management, natural resources project, like woodland management, woodlots, preservation of rangelands. The general approach now when you go to the community is you want a participatory approach. You want to hear their idea of forest management, how they've been doing it. And we take the good parts, and then we also integrate the science that we know and manage the environment. So it is there. Even the process of bylaw formulation process, or the bylaws themselves, most of them, if you look at them, they stem from the indigenous knowledge systems that are already there in the community. And then maybe, again, I think as foresters or people who practice tree care and tree growing, some of the practices that we are implementing, they are practices that we've learned from the community, from the people, from the indigenous knowledge. In the case where we don't use chemicals or herbicides to control weeds or pests, there are some knowledge systems that are already there in the community that we use. In the case of planting, when you plant or certain reactions of trees, we learn a lot from the community. So I would say, to a certain extent, there is that integration. And then on the question of bylaws, we need to understand that while bylaws are binding, sometimes local communities, they are overwhelmed by let me say, migrants, people who come into an area. Like, bylaws are usually localized, but when you have people coming in and overwhelming the traditional leadership, overwhelming the resource committees, then sometimes it is difficult for them to monitor monitor the forest or preserve the environment. I'll give examples where you have influx of illegal gold panners, or in the case of Matabeleland, where you have influx of mopane worm harvesters. Those places, they do have bylaws, but in the end, they are overwhelmed by the people. And then lastly, you also realize that the current forest bill and also the forest policy, the draft forest policy that is there, they recognize a lot the importance of indigenous knowledge systems, or the importance of community in forest management. There will be lots of recognition of local efforts, local forests, even forests outside the demarcated forests will also be managed even by the government itself. So there is something when it comes to integrating all these things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Matutu. I think we'll get the last two questions and then we wrap up. Joanne is back. Lucius, if you're still there, please kindly repeat your question, which was directed to BirdLife.
All right, thank you. My question to Joanne was, there was a mentioning of the generalization by our local languages when it comes to naming of birds. For example, there was an issue of Amangi and Iskova, you know, referring to a group of birds. So I was saying, what efforts have been put forward by BirdLife Zimbabwe and the other institutions that are concerned about the conservation of birds in trying to correct that anomaly whereby the youth, especially those who are still growing up, are being updated on the differences that exist amongst those group namings of birds, so that as we monitor the species of these birds, we can actually tell that this species is increasing or decreasing, something like that. Because the moment we generalize, we'll find that maybe one subspecies is at a disadvantage, and the correction can be very difficult if we are just generalizing them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucius, for the great question. Like I had mentioned in my presentation, this presents a particular conservation challenge, especially when it comes to naming of birds and grouping a whole lot of birds into one, placing them under one umbrella. So the efforts that we're putting in place mainly have to do with raising awareness via different social media platforms. For example, if you check the BirdLife Zimbabwe Facebook page, recently we've been running a series on vouchers. So that's when we differentiate the many types of vouchers we have in the country, sharing their biology and their identification keys. So for our modern youth who are up to date with these technological issues, I'm sure that's one way that we can help them. And then when it comes to the rural areas, I think like I'd shown you in my slide, that some of these birds tend to look similar rather, or have similar morphological characteristics. So them being grouped under one umbrella, we therefore try to push in as much for the whole group to be conceived under a positive light. So in that way, we'll just go ahead and educate the children or the youth or even some of the adults there on the importance of vouchers, you know, their role, the role that they play in waste management in the environment. And we try to continuously engage them on bird watching tours, so that they can also learn to differentiate, because in many cases these birds are differentiated by small morphological differences. So by us going for tours with these children and, you know, actually being on the ground with them, it helps them to appreciate it just a tiny bit better, and to also understand the differences between the multiple species. I hope that answers you.
Thank you so much, Joanne. I think the last question is the one that I read earlier from Kosonke Ndlovu. They're asking, are indigenous knowledge systems still reliable considering the changing climate? So I'll just try to help out. As an environmental scientist, I think indigenous knowledge systems are still reliable considering how, particularly in Africa, we have this huge gap in terms of climate data. So if we are going to be liaising with indigenous communities that are acclimated and know their local environments in and out, it means they're also going to be contributing towards adaptation strategies when it comes to a changing climate, whereby we're seeing less rainfall than usual and changing of seasons. So if we're going to be harnessing indigenous knowledge systems, it means they continue to be reliable as they inform our climate policies in this changing environment that we are in. I think that's my take on the question. I hope Makosonke is satisfied.
Cindy, can I also add in just something on that point?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, I think we actually need indigenous knowledge systems now more than ever, especially considering the issue of climate change that has been brought up. Just imagine if we actually strengthen these beliefs and people start respecting forests, and we start respecting our bird life and even our animals, and adopting to these various conservation practices, we would actually realize that we'll get more microclimates being created, and that would serve to somewhat cushion us just a bit from the effects of climate change. So I think even more now, we need to really get back to our roots and be in sync with indigenous knowledge systems.
Thank you so much, Joanne. I think we have exhausted almost all the questions and we are way over time. Thank you so much for everyone who joined us here on Zoom and on Facebook. For our friends that didn't manage to join us live, the video is there on Facebook. Feel free to recommend the video and also like our page, the Zimbabwe Youth Biodiversity Network, and continue to follow us for more information. Thank you to everyone and continue to enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cindy. Bye, everyone.
Bye.